So thank you everyone for attending and joining me, and I'm really excited to be here with you and share with you something about this MBSR inspired series of sessions. Just by way of background, and there may well be mixed levels of knowledge about the origins of MBSR, but I thought it might be useful just to give you some context. We say MBSR because mindfulness based stress reduction is such a mouthful. But by way of background, MBSR was created by a man called John Kabat-Zinn, and it was while he was working at the Massachusetts Medical School that he first implemented MBSR. And John was he had been a practitioner of mindfulness meditation for many years. He was also a yoga teacher, and he was also passionate about science. He had a PhD in molecular biology, and it was really through his experiences that he was learning, what he was uncovering from through his mindfulness practice, yoga practice, that he thought that this could really help people in the hospital setting. And so his primary motivation for creating MBSR was really to reduce suffering in his little patch. I don't think at the time John was thinking he was creating a program that would be used globally. He was really just looking at his little patch and how to reduce suffering in the hospital context. And in terms of his own influences, he'd been a Zen practitioner. He'd done Vipassana retreats. So he'd had a number of different influences, but also being a product of the Western medical system. And so he really synthesized these elements and was really concerned about how does he make what he's uncovering and discovering accessible to people who would not necessarily or quite naturally or normally be interested in meditation. And so I'll just share with you this screen. And this is a picture of John here, who he's now in his 70s. But interestingly, what was very important for him was to take a lot of care in languaging so that he would make this accessible to people and resonant with people who, as I said, wouldn't normally be drawn to meditation. And so the languaging was very important. And it's why he talked about stress reduction. And his intention was not to decontextualize or fragment the Dharma, but really to recontextualize it in a way that would be more common sense and accessible for people, as I said. The way the program is structured, it's an 8-week program with 2.5-hour sessions each week. And then there's a silent day of practice, virtually silent. And participants are asked to do daily practice between each session. And then there's also group discussions as well. But he was really trying to synthesize these components from both the Eastern Buddhist tradition, Western medical science as well. And the program itself explores this interrelationship between the mind and the body. And of course, the mind is embodied. And as we all know, how we are in our minds affects how we are in our bodies. How we are in our bodies affects our state of mind. So it can be really helpful to start to get to know the nature of your own minds, bodies, and how to work with these as best you can, because they're a tremendous source of wisdom, intelligence. They resource us, and they really are what we take through life and how we experience life. So this program is really essentially, many people come to it first for self-regulation and to manage certain conditions, but it can also be a real program of insight into the nature of mind and how we construct experience as well. Because of his interest in science, he got it researched, and the initial program was, after 8 weeks, they found quite significant reductions in both physical, mental, and emotional symptoms, which continued to be replicated in other programs. So that's why I think it started to be more and more widespreadly used. So originally it was for certain clinical populations. The first cohort was really people with chronic pain, quite chronic conditions, terminal illnesses, where there wasn't much more that the conventional medical system could do. So MBSR is not about replacing that, but more complementarily. And it was really looking at how do we help people reduce their suffering, notwithstanding their diagnosis. And these research findings were really quite promising, because after 8 weeks to have that sort of reduction was quite interesting, given that they'd had no intervening medical treatment. And it's not that their diagnosis had changed. So what's interesting, what had changed was how they related to their diagnosis. And this is really how MBSR can really help us, that it's not about what happens in life, what arises, but how we respond and meet what arises. That is something we have some agency over. And so this is what MBSR can help us with, that no matter what life throws us, all these sorts of curveballs, no matter what balls are thrown our way, how do we meet this in the wisest, kindest way that's going to keep suffering at its minimum? And of course, there is suffering, but how best to do this in a way that doesn't compound and escalate the suffering? So there is now, I think MBSR is probably one of the most widely researched mindfulness or secular mindfulness programs in the world. I think also the recent advances in neuroscience and brain mapping technology, that convergence of that, showing how it can help change the structure of your brain and functionality of your brain in certain ways, has also probably contributed to its more widespread use in a whole lot of populations now, not just clinical populations. So there's certainly been quite a lot of research about it in lots of different ways. But I thought what might be helpful is to give you a bit of an overview of what John means by mindfulness. And again, he wasn't intending for this to be a kind of exhaustive, holistic, definitive definition of mindfulness, but he was again really thinking about the particular context he was working in. And so he introduced this definition as a kind of operational introductory working definition. And he talks about mindfulness as the awareness that arises from paying attention in particular ways. And in particular, there are 3 components. The first is that we're paying attention on purpose. So it's our intention to pay attention. And often you'll hear people talk about mindfulness as a practice of wakefulness, that it wakes us up. And then the second component is where we're directing our attention, which is to this present moment. And of course, no doubt many of us have had that experience of the mind lost in the future, planning, anticipating, worrying, or we're trapped in the past, ruminating over what we should have said, didn't do, etc. And all that time we're missing out on this present moment. So what we're doing with mindfulness is really bringing us back to this present moment. And of course, that can really help us be present for more moments of our life, which can really help us savor this precious life of ours a little more. However, it also can affect engagement. And if we're present, we can be more engaged. And we also know what it's like to not be fully present. And you may well have had this experience if you're talking to someone and you can tell that they're not fully listening to you or their mind's elsewhere. And without them intending that, they are actually communicating that there's more important things or something else is preoccupying them. And I know from my own experience that I too am guilty of doing that, where I'm not completely present. So it also can have a real impact on the quality of our presence and the quality of our relationships and that sense of deeper engagement in our lives. So there's a lot to be said for presence. And then the third component, which can be even more challenging for us human beings, is how do we approach this moment non-judgmentally? Now, of course, that's easier said than done, because as human beings, we have a nervous system that is hardwired to constantly evaluate things. As soon as we enter a new environment, we meet a new person, you might notice how there's automatically a sizing up that happens. Oh, I like her. Oh, I don't like that room. That's too loud, etc. And this is because our nervous system is working out if we feel safe or not. And so it makes sense because we're going to approach and go further towards if we feel safe. But if we're getting danger signals, we're going to retreat, back off, etc. However, often how we judge things, and that happens so automatically and can often be affected by previous experiences that may not be actually arising in this present moment. How we judge things affects how we engage. So already you might have had a half finished thought or a fleeting word about me, about this session. And depending on what your appraisal has been, it will affect how you're engaging. And this is really important. So it's not that judgments don't arise, but can we hold them a little more lightly, be aware of the judgments we're making, and continue to be curious about what's arising. And this is incredibly helpful, particularly in the face of unpleasant experience. Because, of course, in unpleasant experience, we want to get rid of it, go away from it, fight it, flee from it. And the curiosity can help us lean in even if we're otherwise wanting to pull back. So it can start to open up the space and open us up to new possibilities rather than shut things down. So this is really what we're trying to cultivate, more and more curiosity and open-mindedness. And as I said, it's not that the judgments won't arise, but to actually start to notice the judgments. And one of the values in that is also that over time, we can start to see how conditioned we are, how we might notice patterns of appraisal, how we tend to evaluate this person, this situation, these scenarios in a particular way. And of course, that can really help us start to become more aware of our biases, prejudices, etc. So that's what we're trying to do. And another distinction I should probably make is in MBSR courses, we often talk about the formal practice of mindfulness, which is when we set aside a period of time to formally train our minds in this way and pay attention in this particular way. But then there's also informal practice. And so each week participants are asked to do certain exercises so as to weave this way of being into how they're living moments of their life. But of course, the bigger picture is, or the bigger informal practice is life itself. So really this practice of paying attention in these particular ways is hopefully to help us become more present in how we're living our lives in these ways, which can lead to a much deeper engagement in our life, much richer, deeper engagement in our lives, in the world, etc., and a sense of deeper connection as well. So that's sort of a bit of an overview of what it is. I think it might be useful to also mention what it isn't, because sometimes there can be many misconceptualizations. And one of the things that mindfulness is not, although it can be a byproduct of mindfulness practice, but it's not about being relaxed. So if you go into mindfulness practice wanting to be relaxed, already you're wanting things to be different than how they are. And actually, what we're cultivating is this capacity to be present with things exactly as they are, whether we like it or not, the pleasant, the unpleasant, the neutral, because it's wanting things to be different than how they are, which actually creates some anguish, stress, distress. So the more we can learn to be present, curious, open-minded, grounded in the face of no matter what's arising, the more capacity we have to bear a much wider range of experience and start to gain some insights too into what it's like to be this human being and our human condition that we all find ourselves in. So it's not about having a different now, a better now, but how do I really be present to this now, this moment as it's unfolding? It's also not something that we have to acquire from outside of ourselves. It's actually an innate capacity that we all have. And I think that's really lovely to remember, that we all have this ability to really just be open-minded, curious, and see what that offers you as well. And then Often you'll hear people talk about mindfulness as a way of interrupting being on autopilot. So, that experience of you're doing something and your mind's completely elsewhere. And of course, what we're doing in mindfulness is starting to become more aware of what we're doing as we're doing it, whether it be whatever's arising in our internal worlds, external worlds, etc. So, it's much really about being present for all of life, all of what it offers us. Life is the meditation teacher itself. And the practice that I thought we would do today would be an awareness of breath practice. The breath can be a really great object of attention. Number one, because breathing is something that we do on automatic pilot. So even paying attention consciously to something that we do automatically helps us interrupt being on autopilot. But the other real gift of becoming more aware of the breath is that our breath is such a great indicator of our emotional state. So the more you can become familiar with and acquainted with breathing in formal practice, hopefully you'll become more aware of it in moments of your life, and particularly in moments of stress or distress. If you start to notice yourself breathing more quickly, more shallowly, that very moment of recognition can then help you choose. Maybe you want to slow down the breathing, make the out breath 2 counts longer than the in breath. Anyway, just to help slow it down, which then signals to the brain that the threat has passed. And so the whole nervous system can start to downregulate. So it can be really useful to start to be aware of your breathing in more moments of the day. So the breath as a useful object of attention. And the other thing about this practice is that we're really focusing on feeling the physical sensations of the breath. So, not some idea about the breath, not visualizing the breath, but where it is we feel it in the body. And this is because body sensations are grounded in the present moment. So, as soon as we can sense breathing, we can drop into more presence. Of course, the mind may well wander. Many things may call the mind away. It doesn't matter that the mind goes elsewhere. What matters is that you notice where it's gone to and you bring it back. And the breath is always here to come back to, drop into, sense. So the breath is really our grounding object of attention. It also doesn't matter how you breathe. You don't have to breathe in a particular way. Because again, if we think of mindfulness as a way of cultivating the capacity to be present with this moment of life as it is, similarly with this moment of the breath, however we're breathing. So simply let the body breathe in its natural rhythm and see how you go. So we'll practice now.